I never thought I'd see the day when my own uncle would kick me and my family out of the house. We'd called home for years. It wasn't just any house, it had been a safe haven. A place filled with memories, laughter, and the small, quiet comforts that made life bearable. And yet, there we were, bags in hand, standing on the doorstep as he slammed the door in our faces. It all started when my parents passed away unexpectedly. I was barely 23. Suddenly thrust into adulthood with a heap of responsibilities. I wasn't prepared for my uncle, who had always seemed supportive. Took it upon himself to help us, claiming he'd manage everything while I got on with my studies and work. At first, I trusted him. Who wouldn't? He was family. He had always been kind, or so I thought. Things changed the day he started acting differently. It began with small remarks, casual suggestions that maybe we weren't capable of handling the house ourselves. Then it escalated to him questioning every decision. From how we spent money to what we ate for dinner, he insisted on taking control of bills, renovations, and even the garden. At first, I thought he was just trying to help, but the sense of unease kept gnawing at me. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon, when he stormed into the living room, shouting that we had to leave immediately. My little sister, barely 16, started crying and my heart sank. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. He waved his hand dismissively and muttered something about the house needing proper management and family honor. I was stunned. This was our home, our memories. How could he think he could just kick us out like strangers? I didn't have all the legal knowledge at the time. I just knew that something felt deeply wrong. I remembered my parents telling me that the house had been put under my name for safekeeping. I had been a minor when they did it, and my uncle had never mentioned it. Why would he risk so much just to make us miserable? But I couldn't waste time pondering. We needed shelter, warmth, and safety, and all of that seemed impossible under his roof. We spent the night at a friend's place, cramped together on couches and floor mats. The cold air seemed to echo the emptiness I felt inside. I barely slept, my mind spinning with anger and confusion. How could someone I trusted so much betray us like this? The next morning, I went home not to live, but to gather what we could. I opened the old drawers, collected photo albums, and stared at every corner of the house, trying to memorize it, as if that alone could protect it from his grasp. Then I found the paperwork, hidden in a drawer in my parents' study, covered with dust and old receipts. Was the legal document confirming the house was in my name? My heart pounded. I had known in the back of my mind that my parents had made arrangements for me, but I had never really thought it would matter in a real-life confrontation. Now, holding that paper in my hands, I felt a surge of empowerment. He had no idea, not even a hint. I spent the next few days consulting with a lawyer. The legal jargon was overwhelming, but the message was clear. The house was mine, fully, legally, and my uncle had no right to remove us. I remember sitting across from the lawyer, feeling a strange mix of relief and fury. Relief that the law was on my side, fury that my own blood relative had dared to cross me. That day, I decided something inside me changed. I wasn't going to let him bully us anymore, but before taking any direct action, I needed to be strategic. My uncle was cunning, charming to outsiders, and had the kind of personality that made people doubt your version of events. I knew I couldn't confront him recklessly. I had to plan carefully, gather evidence, and ensure there was no chance of him turning the situation against me. Every interaction, every phone call, every conversation had to be deliberate. I started documenting everything. Every time he tried to belittle me over the phone or make passive-aggressive remarks, I recorded it. Every text message, every social media post, every sneer was preserved. It felt tedious at first, but slowly it became my armor. Knowledge is power, I reminded myself. And I wasn't going to let him win. Meanwhile, he continued to flaunt his control to neighbors and friends. He would brag about taking care of the property and supporting the family, all while we were forced to live in temporary apartments and shelters. Watching him smile and pretend to be the hero was infuriating. I realized that the fight wasn't just about the house, it was about exposing the truth and reclaiming our dignity. I also took time to strengthen my position financially. My part-time job wasn't enough, but I started freelancing online, taking small contracts. Anything that would give me an independent stream of income. I didn't want him to manipulate me by controlling finances. Slowly, step by step, I regained my independence, piece by piece, even if the house remained out of reach temporarily. One evening, I decided to visit the house, not to enter, but to observe. Standing at a distance, I watched him moving in and out, arranging furniture as if the house was his alone. I felt a cold determination. This house belonged to me, and soon, very soon, he would have no choice but to admit it. I could feel the tide turning. That night, I spoke to my sister. She was frightened, still haunted by the memory of being thrown out. I held her hand, trying to convey the sense of calm I didn't entirely feel myself. "We're going to get it back," I told her. "It's ours, not his. And we'll make sure everyone knows the truth." She nodded, her eyes wide with hope and fear. I promised myself I would not fail her, not this time. The days that followed were tense. My uncle remained oblivious to the fact that I knew the house belonged to me. I bided my time, preparing legally and emotionally. Every step I took was calculated. I gathered documents, sought advice, and even researched ways to peacefully but decisively reclaim property from a relative who refused to acknowledge the law. It was exhausting, but I felt a strange exhilaration. The scales were tipping in our favor, and the moment of justice was approaching. I won't lie, there were nights I doubted myself. What if he had bribed officials? What if people sided with him? What if my own naivety led to failure? But every time fear crept in, I remembered my parents' voices, their faith in me, and the reason the house had been put under my name in the first place. That house wasn't just bricks and wood, it was a symbol of everything my family had built. And I couldn't let it be stolen. Then came the day I finally decided to confront him. I didn't rush in, I prepared meticulously, lawyer by my side, documents in hand, and cameras set up to record the interaction if necessary. I entered the house not as a trespasser, but as its rightful owner. The look on his face when he saw me was priceless. Shock, disbelief, and anger all wrapped into one. I stayed calm, letting the legal proof speak louder than words. What are you doing here?" He stammered. "This," I said, handing him the document, "is what I'm doing. This house is mine, legally, completely, and has been since. My parents put it in my name. You have no right to kick us out." His face turned red. He sputtered, trying to come up with excuses, trying to twist reality as he always did, but I remained composed. I presented every piece of evidence I had, gathered every interaction, every misstep he had taken. Slowly, the truth sank in. He realized the game was over. I don't want to give away too much of the ending just yet. There's still a long way to go in this story, but that day marked the turning point. From being powerless and displaced, we moved closer to reclaiming our home, our dignity, and our peace, and that, in many ways, was worth more than any legal victory. After confronting my uncle with the documents, I thought the battle would be over quickly. I was naive. He wasn't going to surrender that easily. Instead, he resorted to manipulation, guilt trips, and outright lies, trying to convince neighbors, friends, and even some distant relatives that he was the victim. "I was only trying to protect the family," he would say, his voice dripping with false sincerity. It was infuriating to see people fall for it. But I knew that my evidence was stronger than his stories. I just had to be patient. I also learned an important lesson. Sometimes family can be more dangerous than strangers. My uncle wasn't just greedy, he was calculating. He had spent years creating a network of influence in the community, presenting himself as generous and reliable, all while hiding his true nature. This realization strengthened my resolve if I wanted to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I had to be methodical, thorough, and unshakable. The lawyer advised me to file an official notice, making it impossible for him to legally claim ownership or even continue his harassment. It was a complicated process, but I took it step by step, each form, each signature. Each notarized document became a weapon in my arsenal. Every night, I pored over legal texts, preparing for every possible argument my uncle could throw at me. By the end of the week, I felt ready not just mentally, but strategically in the meantime. I needed to stabilize life for my sister. She had been deeply traumatized by the eviction, and seeing her happy again was as important as reclaiming the house. We found a small rental nearby, modest but safe. It wasn't luxurious, but it gave us breathing space and security. We painted the walls, bought a few new furnishings, and tried to create a home. Even if it wasn't our rightful one yet, the process reminded me that home isn't just a building. It's where you feel safe, loved, and capable of planning your next move. Every interaction with my uncle was tense. He'd call, pretending to be conciliatory, offering solutions that were actually traps. I learned to respond with calm firmness. "I'm aware of my rights," I would say. "There's no need for discussion until you acknowledge the facts." He hated that I wouldn't be intimidated. I could almost hear his frustration growing over the phone, the repeated attempts to control me failing at every turn. One day, I decided to involve the neighbors subtly. I didn't want to start a feud, but I needed witnesses who could attest to my family's presence in the house and my uncle's recent behavior. Quietly, I spoke to several longtime residents, recounting the situation without drama, emphasizing the legality of ownership. Slowly, opinions began to shift. People started looking at my uncle differently, questioning his sudden aggression. His carefully maintained facade was cracking. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence of his attempts to manipulate or harass. U.S. texts, emails, and recorded calls painted a clear picture of his true intentions. Each piece of evidence was cataloged, dated, and stored safely. My lawyer praised the thoroughness, noting that in court, this kind of documentation would be invaluable. More importantly, it gave me confidence. Confidence that I could face him, the system, and even skeptical neighbors without fear. During this time, I also reflected on my own behavior. I realized that anger alone wasn't enough. Patience, strategy, and emotional control were essential. If I let rage guide me, I could make mistakes that would cost everything. I learned to take deep breaths, to step back, and to plan carefully. Each setback became a lesson rather than a defeat. This internal growth was as important as reclaiming the house itself. Finally, the day came to serve him with a formal notice. I remember the adrenaline as I handed over the legal documents. My heart racing, my hands steady. He looked shocked, then furious, then defiant. "You can't do this," he shouted, trying to regain control. But the law was clear, and this time, he couldn't twist reality in his favor. I remained calm, letting the weight of the papers speak louder than my words. The tension escalated in the days that followed. My uncle tried to make the house uninhabitable, calling maintenance companies and filing false complaints. I stayed vigilant, monitoring every action. I also documented everything meticulously, ready for the inevitable confrontation. It felt like a chess game, each move calculated, anticipating his responses. For the first time, I realized that reclaiming what was mine wasn't just about confrontation, it was about strategy, foresight, and emotional resilience. During this period, I found allies in unexpected places. A few distant relatives who had been skeptical of my uncle's behavior reached out, offering advice, support, and even small gestures of solidarity. Neighbors who had once admired his charm now questioned his motives. Slowly, the tide was turning. I could feel it, like the first hint of sunlight after a long, dark storm. But my uncle wasn't ready to admit defeat. One evening, he confronted me directly, standing in front of the house with an air of arrogance. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You don't know what you're doing." I looked at him calmly, holding the notice in my hand. On the contrary, I said, I know exactly what I'm doing. This house belongs to me. You have no right to threaten, intimidate, or harass anyone here. He tried to argue, to manipulate, even to guilt me, but I had learned every tactic he would use. I remained unshaken. The weight of truth and legality was on my side. I realized something crucial in that moment. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. I could feel the shift. He was beginning to realize that his power over us was slipping. I also made a personal vow that day I would protect this house. Not just for myself, but for my sister, for our memories, and for the legacy of our parents. Every step I took from then on was about more than reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming dignity, justice, and peace. It was about teaching a lesson that betrayal and greed could not triumph over truth, and persistence died as weeks passed. My uncle's efforts to resist legal measures became weaker. His calls grew frantic, his attempts at manipulation more desperate. He even tried bribery subtly through middlemen, but I refused to entertain any of it. My lawyer advised against confrontation outside official channels, so I kept my distance. While monitoring everything, each failed attempt of his brought a quiet sense of vindication. The community slowly began to acknowledge the reality. My uncle's carefully curated image was falling apart. People saw the inconsistency between his words and actions. The more he tried to assert dominance, the more it backfired, and while I never sought revenge for the sake of malice, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching truth prevail. Amid all this, I took time to nurture small victories. My sister began smiling again. She started attending school more confidently, and we slowly rebuilt a sense of normalcy. We were no longer entirely displaced. While we hadn't physically moved back into the house yet, emotionally, we felt stronger than ever. The combination of preparation, legal support, and resilience was giving us power over a situation that once seemed hopeless. Looking back, I realized that reclaiming the house wasn't just about property, it was a journey of growth. I had learned patience, courage, and the importance of careful planning. I had discovered allies in unexpected places, built resilience, and gained confidence in my ability to face adversity. The house was more than bricks and walls, it represented family, legacy, and justice. And as I stood outside the house one quiet evening, the sun setting behind me, I felt an overwhelming sense of anticipation. The final act was approaching. The confrontation that would finally bring closure and reclaim our rightful home was near. The journey had been long, but every obstacle, every challenge, and every moment of fear had prepared me for this, and I was ready. The tension in the air was almost tangible as the day of the formal legal hearing approached. My uncle had grown more erratic with each passing week, and I knew he was desperate. He tried everything from frantic phone calls to vague threats to visiting neighbors, in hopes of gathering support, but nothing worked. The legal documents I had carefully collected formed an unbreakable shield around us. Still standing outside the courthouse that morning, I couldn't shake the mix of anxiety and anticipation. Walking in, I held my sister's hand tightly. Her small grip felt grounding, reminding me that this wasn't just about a house. It was about her safety, our dignity, and the memory of our parents. We were reclaiming more than property, we were reclaiming control of our lives. Every step toward the courtroom felt heavy with purpose, yet lighter with the knowledge that justice was on our side. Inside, the atmosphere was formal but tense. Lawyers whispered strategy, clerks shuffled papers, and my uncle sat at the far end. Attempting to mask his anxiety with forced calm, he glanced at me several times, his eyes flashing a mixture of anger and disbelief. I met his gaze without flinching. I had rehearsed every word, every piece of evidence, every possible counterattack in my mind for weeks. Today, it all had to come together. The hearing began with standard introductions and preliminary statements. My uncle's lawyer tried to frame the argument as though we were intruders, painting a picture of chaos and irresponsibility. But when it came time to present the documents, my lawyer handed over the proof of ownership. I watched as the room fell silent, the official papers, notarized and legally binding, left no room for manipulation. Even the judge's expression shifted subtly. The strength of the evidence was undeniable. My uncle squirmed, trying to interject. But every attempt to contradict the documents was countered with precision. I felt a wave of calm confidence wash over me. I wasn't just defending a building. I was defending truth, and the truth was on my side. Each piece of evidence, emails, letters, recorded conversations, and financial statements painted a clear narrative of his attempts to displace us unjustly. As the hearing progressed, I realized something important. People can only maintain lies for so long. My uncle had relied on deception, charm, and intimidation for years, but now, faced with clear facts, his carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The more he tried to twist reality, the more transparent his actions became. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that honesty and diligence had dismantled his tactics without me having to stoop to his level. During the recess, my sister whispered, "Do you think we'll get it back?" I smiled, squeezing her hand. "We already have," I said softly. "This is just the last step. The truth doesn't lie. And today, everyone can see it." She nodded, her eyes bright with hope. For the first time in weeks, I saw relief wash over her face. She wasn't just witnessing a legal battle. She was witnessing justice. When the proceedings resumed, the judge carefully reviewed all the documents and listened to both sides. My uncle attempted one last-ditch effort, claiming technicalities and procedural errors, but my lawyer anticipated every argument. Each rebuttal was clear, concise, and unassailable. I could feel the shift in the room. The balance had tipped decisively. My uncle's frustration was palpable, his previous confidence replaced with desperation. Finally, the judge spoke. The words were measured, deliberate, and decisive. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that the ownership of the property resides with the plaintiff. Any attempts to remove or intimidate the rightful owners are hereby void and will be legally penalized if continued. Relief flooded me. I had prepared for this moment, but hearing it aloud, officially, was a feeling beyond description. My uncle's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked like he might protest. But the legal weight behind the words silenced him. He realized there was no escape. The house was ours, legally and rightfully, and no amount of intimidation, manipulation, or charm could change that. I felt a strange mix of triumph and pity. This was a man I once respected, reduced by his own greed and arrogance to defeat. After the hearing, we returned to the house with the keys officially in my possession. Walking through the front door, I felt a wave of nostalgia and relief. Every room, every corner, every familiar scent spoke of memories preserved. I could almost hear my parents' voices as though they were saying, "You did it. You protected what matters." My sister ran ahead, exploring rooms she had feared would be lost to us forever. Her laughter echoed through the halls, a sound I had longed to hear. The following days were spent reclaiming control. We coordinated with trusted contractors to repair minor damages and ensure the house was fully functional. Neighbors came by, offering support, congratulations, and apologies for doubting us. The community's perception of my uncle shifted drastically as word spread about the legal outcome. People began seeing the contrast between his public persona and his private actions. I realized that justice extended beyond the courtroom. Reclaiming our home also restored our reputation and dignity. My uncle, meanwhile, retreated. He made a few feeble attempts to argue or negotiate, but the court's ruling left him powerless. He could no longer manipulate, intimidate, or control. Every call, every visit, every attempt to assert authority was met with legal reminders of his boundaries. I watched as the man who once held so much influence over us was rendered ineffective, not through anger or revenge, but through steadfast commitment to truth and law. During this period, I also focused on rebuilding our emotional lives. The trauma of eviction had left scars, and my sister needed reassurance that we were safe. We spent evenings in the living room, sharing stories, looking at old photographs, and laughing again. Slowly, the fear and anxiety that had shadowed us began to lift. Reclaiming the house wasn't just a legal victory, it was a psychological one. We had regained our sanctuary, our peace, and our sense of security. I also took the time to reflect. On the journey, the lessons were invaluable. I had learned patience, persistence, and strategic thinking. I had discovered the importance of documentation, preparation, and emotional control. I had realized that standing firm in the face of betrayal and intimidation was not just about property, but about protecting what you hold dear. Every obstacle, every manipulation, every moment of fear had prepared me to handle this challenge effectively. My uncle's defeat was complete, but I chose not to pursue vengeance beyond what was necessary. There was no joy in destroying someone else. The satisfaction came from reclaiming what was ours and seeing justice prevail. I realized that revenge, if left unchecked, can consume you. Instead, I focused on restoration, restoring our home, our lives, and our sense of belonging. With the house fully under our control, life gradually returned to a new normal. Repairs were made, routines were established, and my sister's schooling continued uninterrupted. The fear of eviction was gone, replaced by a sense of stability and empowerment. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely, knowing that we had faced betrayal, fought with strategy, and emerged victorious. One evening, as I looked out the window, I reflected on the transformation not just of the house, but of ourselves. The experience had forged resilience, courage, and a deep understanding of justice. My sister and I had not only reclaimed a physical space, but had also learned that integrity, preparation, and perseverance could overcome even the most insidious obstacles. And as the sun set over our reclaimed home, I realized that this victory was about more than bricks and mortar. It was about asserting our right to live without fear, to protect our family, and to honor the memory of those who came before us. The house was ours, and more importantly, we had reclaimed our lives. Life after reclaiming the house was not immediately peaceful. The legal battle had ended, yes, but the emotional scars lingered. My sister still flinched at loud voices, and I carried a quiet wariness every time my uncle's name was mentioned. It took time to realize that victory wasn't only about possession, it was also about healing, both for her and for me. I had fought for the house, but now I had to fight for normalcy. We began slowly reintegrating into our old routines. I returned to work with renewed determination. My sister returned to school with an energy I hadn't seen in months, and together we started to restore the house to its former warmth. Each room became a symbol of resilience. Every repaired wall, every polished floor was a reminder that we had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. The house, once a battleground, became a sanctuary once again, yet my uncle remained a distant shadow. He had retreated, nursing his humiliation, avoiding any confrontation that might draw attention to his defeat. I noticed that his calls stopped, his visits ceased, and his attempts to sway neighbors ended in silence. The change in him was almost surreal. It was as if the house's rightful ownership had stripped him not only of power over property, but of the ability to intimidate those he once manipulated. During this time, I reflected on my own growth. I had been thrust into a situation far beyond my years, forced to navigate betrayal, legal complications, and emotional upheaval, and yet I had emerged not only victorious but wiser. I had learned the value of preparation, the importance of strategic thinking, and the necessity of patience in the face of provocation. Most importantly, I had learned that true strength lies in controlling one's own actions rather than reacting impulsively to others' cruelty. Rebuilding the house was more than physical repairs. It was an exercise in reclaiming our identity. Each piece of furniture we restored, each photograph we hung, each room we organized became a testament to endurance. The house began to feel alive again, filled with memories, laughter, and the quiet assurance that we were safe. I watched my sister explore every corner, her curiosity returning, her fears dissolving, and felt an immense sense of accomplishment. In parallel, I worked to repair relationships within the family and community, while my uncle had attempted to isolate us through manipulation. I sought to reconnect with relatives who had remained neutral or skeptical. I shared our side of the story calmly, without malice, letting facts speak for themselves. Slowly, people began to understand the truth. My uncle's attempts at deception had crumbled under the weight of evidence, and the community began to see us not as victims, but as resilient, capable individuals who had stood their ground. Despite the sense of victory, there were moments of reflection that carried a bitter edge. I had once trusted my uncle implicitly. I had believed that family bonds would shield us from harm. His betrayal had been painful, leaving scars that weren't visible but ran deep, and yet, even in the hurt, I found clarity. Trust must be earned, and blind faith can be dangerous. This lesson, though harsh, became a cornerstone of my future decisions. As weeks turned into months, life settled into a new rhythm. The house regained its warmth, laughter returned, and we gradually reclaimed the sense of security we had lost. My sister began thriving academically and socially, and I continued to build financial stability, ensuring that no one could ever again threaten our well-being through dependence or intimidation. We were no longer just survivors, we were architects of our own future. One quiet evening, I found myself sitting in the living room, reflecting on the journey. The house, once a symbol of conflict, now felt like a sanctuary. I thought about my parents, about their foresight in placing the house in my name, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their love and planning had given us a foundation not only of shelter, but of resilience. I understood in that moment that victory was never just about reclaiming property, it was about honoring those who had protected us and carrying forward the lessons they left behind. Interestingly, my uncle's retreat created unexpected opportunities. Without his interference, neighbors began approaching me for advice and collaboration. My reputation, once overshadowed by his charm, now stood clearly. People respected the integrity with which I had handled the situation, the legal battle, the careful documentation, and the measured responses had not only secured the house, but also established a foundation of trust and credibility within the community. During this period, I also focused on emotional healing. Therapy sessions, long conversations with my sister, and moments of self-reflection helped transform lingering fear and anger into resilience. I realized that reclaiming the house had been only part of the battle. Reclaiming our emotional equilibrium was equally crucial. With every step forward, I felt lighter, stronger, and more prepared to handle future challenges.